Let me tell you a story that perfectly shows how these Thailand online romances sometimes begin and how close they can come to costing you money. Because on the surface, this one sounded completely believable. In fact, it was almost convincing enough to work. A guy recently posted about this on Reddit after planning a trip to Thailand. Like a lot of guys do before visiting Pattaya, he created a profile on Thai Friendly just to browse and see what the scene looked like. And if you've ever used Thai Friendly, you'll know exactly what happens next. The moment your profile goes live, the messages start pouring in. Dozens of them. Most experienced guys ignore a lot of those messages because many of them aren't genuine. But one message stood out. This woman said she was an operating room nurse from Udon Thani. Not a bar girl. Not someone asking about meeting up in Pattaya. She said she worked in a hospital and was looking for a serious relationship. That immediately changes the tone of the conversation. Instead of feeling like another dating app chat, it starts to feel more personal, more genuine. So they began talking. At first it was just messages, but within a few days they were video chatting regularly. Sometimes she would call him during breaks at work. She appeared to be wearing scrubs, and the background looked like a hospital environment. Now, if you're on the receiving end of that, it's very convincing. You're seeing someone in a professional setting. You're having normal conversations. Nothing about it feels like a typical scammer. Over the next 2 weeks, they talked constantly, texting every day, video calls several times. They seemed to get along well, and eventually he started thinking about adjusting his travel plans. Originally, he was planning to spend time in Pattaya, but since things seemed to be going so well with this woman, he started considering spending his trip in Udon Thani instead, so he could meet her. That's when the situation took a strange turn. One day she told him a story about another man. Apparently, before she started talking to him, she had briefly exchanged messages with someone else on Thai Friendly, an Italian man who supposedly lives in Udon Thani. According to her, the man became obsessed with her, and one day he actually showed up at the hospital where she worked, carrying flowers. She said she told him she wasn't interested. In fact, she even told him she already had a boyfriend, meaning the guy she was talking to online. At that point, according to her story, the Italian man became angry and left, but the situation didn't end there. The next day, she told him the man approached her again. This time, she said she was walking with friends when he grabbed her arm and tried to pull her away from them so he could talk to her. She described him as aggressive and unstable. Naturally, she said she reported the situation to the police. The police brought the man in for questioning, but according to her, they released him soon afterwards. Now at this point, the guy listening to this story is already emotionally invested. He's been talking to this woman every day for 2 weeks. They've had video calls. He's thinking about traveling across the country to meet her. So when she tells him she's frightened and dealing with a stalker, it triggers something in your brain. You want to help. And that's exactly where these scams begin. A few days later, she messaged him again with an update. The police had contacted her. They asked her to come back to the station. And this is where the story became even more suspicious. She said the police told her there wasn't much they could legally do about the Italian man. However, there was another option. For 20,000 baht, about $600, they could cancel his visa and deport him. Problem solved. No more stalker, no more danger. Just one payment. Now think about how carefully that situation is constructed. First, they build trust. Daily conversations, video calls, a believable job. Then they introduce a crisis, someone dangerous, someone unstable. And finally, they present a solution that requires money. Not thousands of dollars. Just enough to feel like a reasonable emergency expense. About $600. Small enough that many people might consider paying it. But in this case, something didn't feel right. The guy started thinking about the situation logically. If the police had the authority to cancel someone's visa, why would they need a private payment to do it? That's not how immigration works anywhere. So instead of sending the money, he blocked her. Immediately. Just like that. And then he thought about one final detail that made the entire story even stranger. During their conversation, she had actually sent him a photo of the supposed Italian stalker, which means one of two things. Either the entire story was fabricated, or some random guy's picture was being used as part of the scam. The guy who posted the story even said he almost felt sorry for the supposed stalker, because if the story was fake, that guy might not even know his picture was being used in someone else's scam. Now, if you've spent time around Thailand dating forums, you'll probably recognize the pattern. This is basically a variation of the classic sick buffalo scam. The details change, but the structure is always the same. First, they build trust. Then they create a dramatic emergency. And finally, they ask for money to solve it. Sometimes it's a hospital bill. Sometimes it's a family emergency. Sometimes a motorcycle accident. Sometimes a sick water buffalo. And sometimes, apparently, a stalker who needs to be deported. But the important thing to understand is that these stories are carefully designed to trigger your emotions. They make you feel protective, responsible, even heroic. You think you're helping someone you care about. But once money enters the relationship, the emergencies rarely stop. First, it's a visa problem. Then it's another issue. Then another crisis. And suddenly you've sent thousands of dollars to someone you've never actually met. The guy in this story made the right decision. He stopped the situation before it reached that point. And that's exactly why it's important to talk about stories like this. Because a lot of men travel to Thailand with very little understanding of how these online setups work. The safest approach is always the simplest one. Don't build emotional relationships online before you arrive. Meet people in person, take things slowly, and never send money to someone you've never met. If you're planning to date while traveling, it's much safer to stick with platforms where expectations are clear and everyone knows what they're there for. If you want to see the dating apps that actually work for meeting women while traveling, without all this drama, I've put a guide together on the best ones. You can find it at hotmilfdates.com. It shows which apps actually work in places like Thailand, Europe, and the US, and which ones are just full of bots and scams. Because the last thing you want on a trip is getting pulled into a story that ends with you wiring money to someone you've never met. And if someone ever tells you they need money to deport a stalker, you now know exactly how that story ends.